r/nosleep. Posted by you/first. Breath 1. The apartment next to me is supposed to be empty. It's not. I moved into my apartment complex 2 months ago. I started hearing things a week later. It was subtle at first. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I would wake up to a faint scratching sound from somewhere behind the walls. I thought it could be mice. Or rats. I have lived through enough shitty one-bedroom apartments in Manhattan to recognize the signs. Small little turds on the floor. Tiny holes in the plaster. An unending scratching that sounds like 1,000 little feet marching to the beat of my headache. My symptoms fit the bill. It had to be a mouse. And so I put out traps. I invested in a little steel wool. The internet says the best way to catch a rat is peanut butter. I slathered spoonfuls of the stuff all over a fresh tomcat trap. Amazon's best. I went to bed with the expectation that a fat rodent would be dead in my living room by the following morning. I laid awake eagerly awaiting their demise. But it rained a lot that night. After I turned off the TV, I tried to listen for the sounds of my furry friends falling for the bait. But the storm overtook almost every sound. Cracks of thunder shook the glassware on my kitchen counter. Water got inside through the cracks and spaces between the windows framing. I had to put a towel down. The dripping started to annoy me more than the rats ever did in the first place. But, somewhere, underneath it all, I heard something else. Something a lot more frightening than rats. A voice whispering help me. I never really believed in the paranormal. I told people that a lot. I never saw signs, or spirits, like everybody else. Part of my subconscious felt like maybe this was my comeuppance. The ghosts on the street had heard me talking shit and now they were going to come for me. Maybe just to show me who is boss, so to speak. And I had nothing for protection. Nobody to verify my experiences. I lived alone in the middle of a lightly occupied skyrise. A demon or poltergeist could fuck with me all they wanted. And so I pulled the sheets up to my chin, while the scratching started to overtake the storm, along with my rationality. The constant repetition of help me floated further through the walls. She started to get louder. More urgent. My fear-paralyzed mind told me that she was getting closer. I knew that was impossible, but I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of bed and marched out of my apartment, nearly stepping on the unoccupied rat trap myself. The building kept a guard on desk duty throughout the night. He needed to know about the voice. I hopped in the elevator with sweatpants and no socks. When it opened on the ground level, a surprised security guard waited for me behind the desk. "Sir? Are you okay? Can you check if the apartment next to me is occupied?" The tall Hispanic man furrowed his brow worriedly as he eyed my evening wear with distaste. He wore an official-looking blue button shirt with black slacks with a radio clipped to the belt. "We really should not divulge. Somebody has been screaming help me all night. I think they are in trouble. But I have never seen anyone go in there." The man looked worried as he pounded into the small laptop placed on the desk. "Okay, what apartment number?" 522. "We haven't rented many units up there since we took over." That's what I said. "Yup, 522 and 524 are empty. You have one other tenant at the other end of your floor. Maybe you heard his television. The walls here are very thin, sir, and we are actively working on the rodent issue. I think we need to call the police." The man flashed a smile that made the goosebumps on my skin slide up like candy dots. Like he was prepared for the accusation. Like he knew something that I didn't. His cool expression placated onto such ordinary features made my stomach turn uncomfortably. "Like I said, the apartment is empty. Would you like to go and see for yourself?" "I would." My willing response definitely took him aback. He punched again at the laptop nervously. I had no idea what he was typing. After a minute's hesitation, he walked past me towards the elevator. "Let's go. 522 first. I've got the key." I followed the guard into the elevator. Something about his demeanor continued to make me cautious. He seemed confident. Excited, even. At the time I chalked up the oddity to over-interest in the mystery before us. It's possible some kids broke in. But I doubt it. These locks are pretty secure. I still think you heard a neighbor. I nodded wordlessly. When the doors opened again, we marched together down the hall towards apartment 522. I waited patiently while he opened the lock and beckoned me inside. It was empty. Our voices echoed across the recently finished floors and furniture less void inside the studio apartment. I paced around and checked the nooks and crannies. I waited a couple minutes and listened for the voice. I even called out to it. But nobody answered. The only sound I heard were the steady ricochet of raindrops against the windowsills. Satisfied? We still have 524. My new friend started to look a little less confident. Look, it's late, and somebody has to watch the desk. Do we need to do this now? I know what I heard. He stared at me and studied my demeanor for a moment. I shifted awkwardly and tried to appear intimidating. Okay. The guard once again flashed a friendly smile as he gestured me out into the hallway and locked up behind us. We passed my own apartment on the way towards 524. I thought about going back inside and locking the door. Something about the situation made me squirm. But I didn't. My name is Michael, by the way. What is your name? Matt. Well, Matt, I'm sorry we have to meet under these circumstances. I nodded and waited while Michael opened up the door. His casual attitude continued to make me uncomfortable. 524 wasn't empty. Boxes upon boxes were stacked on the floor with neat little labels on each. Spare kitchen chairs made the studio tough to navigate. Once again, Michael waited by the door, while I navigated the junk and tried to investigate the other rooms. The small corner kitchen contained the usual boilerplate electronics. The drawers appeared untouched and empty. A thin line of dust formed over the countertops. I moved on to the bathroom and found a recently renovated shower head sparkling against a fresh paint job. I started to get jealous, and let my guard down a bit. This place looked nicer than my own. I bet they would be renting it out soon. I was prepared to write the entire thing off as an odd experience, before a voice spoke to me inside the bathroom. Help me. It was closer this time. In the same room. I nearly jumped out of my skin, but tried to keep my cool around Michael, who was still outside creeping in the hallway. There was a closet in the bathroom. I opened it. Sitting inside was a teenage girl. She wasn't wearing any clothes. She pushed her knees up to her shoulders and linked her feet together in a sad attempt to remain modest. Sweat poured down her brow. It caused her pretty brown hair to become matted and tangled on her forehead. I covered her mouth and mine after she whispered again. It's him. He did this. Footsteps approached from the hallway. I raised a finger, as if to tell her to wait, and closed the door in the poor girl's face. Then I rushed over to the toilet and flushed the handle. The footsteps stopped. Everything all right in there? Yeah, sorry. Just had to tinkle. This remodel is nice. Gotta get you guys to update my apartment. I opened the door and was immediately greeted by a very suspicious looking security guard. You know, I've got a leaky window frame. Who can I talk to about that? Michael stared at me for about 30 seconds. At first he looked angry. Then he looked confused. Finally the suspicion faded from his wrinkled features. Property owner. Not me. I laughed awkwardly and pushed past him. I walked out into the hallway in a rush, never bothering to look behind my shoulder as Michael followed anxiously after. I could hear him locking the door to 524 as I jetted towards my own apartment. You don't want to check anywhere else? I called out something back. I don't remember what. The adrenaline coursed through my veins so quickly that my futile attempts at being casual dissipated the moment I got to my door. I fumbled for the keys in my sweatpants pocket. I clacked them awkwardly against the metal lock. Finally they found a groove and the door handle turned willingly against my hand. Anything else I can do for you tonight? Michael had caught up to me. He looked suspicious again. I could sense that he might try to stop me. I had to come up with something. Sorry, man, that last trip to the bathroom didn't cut it. Too much chili last night. Gotta go. Michael guffawed over my shoulder as I opened the door and slammed it in his face. I tried to wait a few seconds before applying the chain lock. I waited for his footsteps to fade away first. I didn't want to spook him. Only then I released my hand from the handle and collapsed to the floor. The first responders arrived about 10 minutes later. I have to commend them for the speed. Part of me worried that Michael would try to run. Part of me worried he would go back for the girl. Part of me worried he might try to come after me. He didn't. Police rescued the girl from the bathroom closet. Her name was Molly. She was 16 years old. And she wasn't the only one. 7 other women were rescued from empty apartments throughout the complex. Each identified Michael as their abductor. Apparently, he kept them drugged and locked inside various rooms inside the building. He returned to visit them every night. Some were tortured. Some abused. One was already dead. Posted by you/first, Breath 1. A stranger stayed overnight in a storm. Matt, do you hear that? Someone's knocking at the door. I sat up in bed and checked the watch on my dresser. 2:15. The wind has a way of making the most innocent sounds suspicious. A tapping at the window could be nothing more than an exposed branch. A scraping in the ceiling could be something stuck on the roof. A pounding at the door. Well, that could mean any number of things. Busted pipes. Expanding air ducts. Even something as innocent as a front door ornament getting a little too ornery. We've had that one happen before. But as I listened for traces of movement in the night, I knew my wife had to be right. 3 dramatically clear knocks again echoed down the hallway of our small home. What do they want? Who is it? It's 2 in the friggin' morning, Em whispered. I hopped out of bed and threw on some basketball shorts in the dark. The lights were out. I flicked the switch by my nightstand a few times, and nothing responded. I grunted and then yowled a bit after stepping on a cat toy. Em scolded me for that. Quiet. Now he knows we're home. 3 more consistent knocks seemed to confirm her theory. How do you know it's a he? I whispered with a silent smile. It was a shameless little game I played to make her scared. We had been through this routine fairly often in the past few weeks. Em was always hearing things in the night. Ever since we moved. And I was always the investigator, with my trusty Louisville slugger from high school by my side. I never found anything. But my looking always made her feel better. Our new house in the country tended to set my wife on edge a bit. 3 more knocks. They sounded hurried now. I stumbled into the living room, still aching from my bumped toe, and reached for the trusty Louisville waiting in its spot behind the couch. The knocks began to lose all rhythm at all. The owner pounded the door anxiously, apparently losing patience, before his angry footsteps retreated down the porch. I waited a moment. Then I opened the door. The storm had added several inches of snow overnight. The wind pushed it right into my face. We had heard about horrible traffic on the parkway. Commuters had been stuck for hours. People had actually abandoned their cars, instead opting to walk home, and get them later. The local road that led to my house was itself left unblemished by plows or tires. Only a single pair of footprints led from the highway, a few miles away, all the way to our front door. Standing at the end of them, and at the bottom of my front steps, was an ordinary-looking man. I couldn't see most of his features, at first. He wore a heavy black parka, with a dorky feathered hood on top, shielding his head from the wind. Dark snow pants almost covered a pair of pristine tan Timberland-like boots. Something about the outfit looked familiar. The man appeared ready to give up and go away as he fumbled for something in his pockets. But I called out to him. I don't know why. Maybe I felt more confident with the bat by my side. Can I help you? The stranger turned at once in relief. He looked to be middle-aged. Dark black hair peeked out through the hood and dangled in front of cool blue eyes. He hopped up the steps immediately and reached out confidently to shake my hand. When he spoke, his voice sounded oddly high-pitched. His breath and coat stunk of some unfamiliar type of old man cologne. Oh, thank God. Thank God for the Good Samaritan. Sir, my car broke down on the highway, a few miles from here. The engine is dead. My cell phone is out of battery. Fucking technology, right? I am from out of town and I don't know my ass from a back road out here. I know it's late. I know how this must look. But would you mind if I stepped inside and used your phone? I looked the man up and down uneasily. He seemed harmless enough. But, if my older brother taught me one thing, it's don't trust a strange man in your house after hours. I tried to think of a way to let the stranger down easy. Instead, I opted for the truth. Our phone's dead. The power is out here. Sorry about that. He looked wounded, and that definitely stung my conscience a bit. He turned to stare helplessly at the acres of empty, untouched snow before him. 7 or 8 inches had stacked up in some places. The plows were nowhere to be seen. The town was almost always woefully unprepared for unexpected storms. The man's lack of options quickly became apparent. Okay. Guess I better get walking. I felt a brush of satin before my wife appeared by my side. You could stay here a bit, sir. Until the power comes back? I pushed the door back a bit and whispered angrily to Emily. What are you doing? We don't know this man. So what? He's stuck. It's all over Facebook. The highway is still backed up. This is something my dad would do. Sneak out of the house during a storm for some fast food, or something. Plus, you heard him, we're the Good Samaritans. Just like the Bible. Great. Somebody started to take church a little too seriously. I tried to disguise my groan before throwing the door back open. So, how about it? You can sleep on the couch until morning if you like. The man nodded graciously and pushed himself past me. He immediately began pulling off waterlogged clothing in our hallway. Upon closer inspection, all of it appeared to be about 3 sizes too small. I thought nothing of it at the time. I will. Go throw this in the dryer, Emily offered. I'll run it when the power comes back. She disappeared down the stairs as the man made himself comfortable on my couch. He pulled out an old cell phone and stared down it in surprise. "Got a towel?" he asked me, pointing to the sopping mess accumulating on our wood floors. "Or some clothes?" I ran into the bathroom to search the closet for spare towels. Something about the man's arrogance annoyed me. Here we were, allowing him into our home in the middle of the night, without suspicion, and he was already barking orders. I found an old rag buried under a basket filled with mascara and pulled it loose. When I came back outside, the stranger had stretched his long legs fully out on our couch. "You know, that's a pretty sweet wife you got there," he giggled as I wiped up the mess. "Pretty sweet indeed. Wish I had one that sweet." The words made my skin crawl. Emily waltzed up from the basement in a hurry and smiled happily to both of us in the living room. "Sorry about that. Hopefully the power comes back soon." I wanted to say something to her. But not in front of the creep. He stared at her like a dog eyeing a brand new bone. I suddenly noticed the shorts she was wearing. I noticed the lack of a bra. We were just in bed, after all. And the stranger seemed to notice too. "Say, honey, do you work out a lot?" he asked. My wife blushed and covered herself apologetically. She always looked for the best in people. And she had heard her fair share of inappropriate jokes in the day. "Oh, I should put something on, excuse me." I moved to follow her into the bedroom as a familiar jingle danced its way towards the couch. "Oh. Look at that. You've got yourself a fat cat." My tuxedo kitten, Figaro, hopped happily onto the couch and into the man's outstretched arms. He purred at the attention from such new and strange company. The man happily allowed his face to be licked and pawed. He reached out and snatched Fig up in his burly arms. "Yeah. He's a good boy," I explained awkwardly. "Loves attention." The man smiled a toothy grin in my direction as he offered generous pecks to Figaro's confused forehead. "Oh, they all do, they all do. You know, they say cats are one of the only animals to prefer human interaction to food. They tested it, in a lab somewhere, fuck if I know. But trust of man is built into most house cats' basic instincts. Through years of selective breeding, most of these things trust us implicitly. Isn't that something?" I nodded and said nothing. Something about the way he squeezed Figaro closer to him made me uncomfortable. "You know, I could snap this little shit's neck right now, and he'd let me do it. That did it. I'm sorry if this is rude. But I think you should leave." The stranger blinked. The atmosphere in my living room changed in an instant. A moment's hesitation caused Figaro to hiss and jump through his weakened grip. The ringing bell disappeared down the stairs. "Well. Doesn't seem very Christian of you." I grabbed the bat still resting up against my front door. "Yeah, well, we're Catholic." My wife called out from the bedroom. "Matt, is everything all right?" I shouted my reply without ever taking my eyes off the stranger in front of me. "Stay in the bedroom and lock the door." He got to his feet lazily. He was smiling. Like the threat of me holding a bat amused him. Maybe that wasn't such a bad assertion. At his full height, the stranger stood well over 6 feet tall, and easily dwarfed my scrawny 5 feet 10 inches. "Yes, Emily, stay in bed. I'll be done with your husband shortly." He advanced in a flash. And so I swung the bat like it was an instinct of my own. My brother always told me, if you get in a fight with a bigger man, aim for his knees. And so I did exactly that. I leaned the small cylinder of metal directly across the stranger's kneecaps like my life depended on it. I think it did. The stranger's knees shattered like a piece of glass. Emily later said she could hear the impact from our bedroom. My next blow went to his face. A double tap, if you will. I grabbed the jerk by his collar and immediately dragged him the fuck out of my house. I left him by the foot of our porch and locked the door. I joined Emily in the additionally locked bedroom as she frantically described our situation to dispatch on her now working cell phone. Officers were making their way towards our house. But the snow impeded their travel. We heard someone dragging themselves up the steps. We heard him try to jimmy the door handle. After several unsuccessful attempts, he screamed at us through the night, and then went quiet. I stood with the bat against my shoulder and waited for him to come back. But it never came to that. You might think I overreacted. I assure you, I didn't. Police officers swarmed my house approximately an hour later. They found the stranger unconscious by the front porch of our home. We described the entire situation to the detectives exactly as I have here. Word for word. The man was arrested and processed accordingly. A few hours later, additional officers were sent to check in on my neighbors. It was a routine activity. They just wanted to see if they could garner more witnesses. What they found precluded that necessity. The stranger made a previous stop that night. 2 miles down the road sat a nice family. Husband, wife, 2 young daughters around my sister's age. One of them worked at the local coffee shop. We had met her a handful of times. The other was studying for grad school. They were murdered inside their own home. Every single last one of them. Mom, dad, and daughters. The stranger left 4 bodies, untouched, sitting and waiting by the front door. The only items missing from the household were one daughter's snow clothes. A black parka, dark pants, and tan Timberland boots. Posted by you/first, Breath 1. The American lion is not extinct. You might not believe it, but my job as a park ranger in Alaska is usually quite dull. A lot of campers report strange encounters in the woods. Some claim to see things at night. Some hear things in the woods. There have been thousands of reports regarding supposedly suspicious incidents during my tenure. I have investigated a lot myself. But they always ended in reasonable explanations. From a bear shitting in the woods, to a pair of particularly passionate squirrels, there is always a reasonable explanation. By now, you might have checked the Wikipedia page for the American lion. You might already know that it stood up to 8 feet tall. You might know that it was 25% larger than the modern lion. You might know that it weighed half a ton, bore claws arguably deadlier than the saber-tooth, and traveled territory throughout the United States. You might even know that it delayed the migration of human beings across the Bering Sea. Because it hunted us. This is all common knowledge. No bullshit. It's available to anyone willing to seek it. Remains of the animal were identified via mitochondrial DNA in the La Brea tar pits, which are located in modern-day Los Angeles. Cave markings confirmed that they could stretch up to 12 feet tall on their hind legs. Modern estimates insist they were wiped from existence approximately 11,000 years ago. Probably by us. But there is one detail unavailable online. The American lion did not go extinct. I encountered one 2 years ago. It was a Saturday evening. My partner and I were stuck in the ranger cabin for an overnight shift. We hoped nobody would call. A night without calls meant a night full of movies. RJ and I usually spent our time on the job watching Jurassic Park, or Godfather, or something similar. Plus, the snowstorm in town was expected to pick up momentum throughout the evening. Neither of us wanted to go outside and test it. Murphy's Law won out in the end. The phone rang shortly after 3 in the morning. RJ groaned, walked over, and answered like it were any other loon on a Tuesday. Then his dark features turned white as a ghost. Slow down. Slow down. Ma'am, what is your location? My coworker gestured to me wildly. 2 fingers out and a thumb up. Time to load the guns. I scanned the cabin desperately for the keys and tried to get everything ready while RJ grabbed our jackets and swept out the door. White sheets of ice whipped at our uncovered faces from all directions as soon as it opened. We are heading over there now. Apply pressure to the wound. He turned to me and tried to mute the receiver as I hopped inside and turned the keys in the ignition of our 4-wheel drive. Fuck, Matt, we're going to need an ambulance. RJ barked the location to me like a drill sergeant while he tried to keep the woman on the phone. I could hear her frantic cries through the receiver. It did not sound good. He's bleeding. He's bleeding so much. It was so big. So big, sir. The moment we pulled up to the small campsite, it was evident that we had missed the worst of the slaughter. Blood seeped into the snow in a horrible trail that led from the fireplace to the cabin. I parked the car and opened the door. Then I fired a round into the air. I thought any predators would be deterred by the sound of gunfire. RJ followed my lead and edged out of our SUV quietly. The snow obscured most of our vision. But the path to the cabin appeared to be clear. He gestured 2 fingers over his shoulder like a fucking G.I. Joe soldier. I stupidly followed his lead. We were about halfway to the cabin when we were attacked. My partner was standing 2 feet in front of me. I never saw the animal until it was too late. RJ screamed before the lion took out his jugular. It was a pitiful sound. Like the last bit of juice being sucked through a straw. 2 quick swats from dinner plate-sized paws shut him up quick. The commotion must have drawn attention from people inside the cabin. Somebody opened the door and stared at the carnage in a dumbfounded stupor. I sprinted towards them and locked the bolt behind us. 3 teenagers stared at me stupidly as the lion audibly disemboweled RJ outside. I broke down and cried in front of them. The kids said nothing until the creature lumbered away a few minutes later. The tall boy stuck out a hand in my pitiful direction and quietly introduced himself as Brian. The boy on the bed was John. He was sitting up with a makeshift bandage pressed to his arm. Blood soaked through the cloth in red. But most of it looked dried. The girl crying by the bedside was Sadie. They all wanted to know the same thing. What is it? We didn't get a look. I tried to supply the rational answers. Wolverines can look disturbing to those who have never seen one. Sightings of mountain lions this far north are rare, but possible. I tried to appear authoritative. I tried not to shake the horror of what just happened. Sadie didn't believe it for a second. That thing was bigger than a mountain lion. You saw it. What is it? I fumbled for more rational answers. Sweat started to pour into my shirt as the seriousness of our situation started to creep in. I was about to reply with more bullshit answers when a loud, obnoxious scraping shook the cabin from head to toe. Oh my God. It knows we're in here, whimpered John. Why would it do this? Didn't it just eat? Begged Brian. It's doing it for fun, whispered Sadie. The noise stretched across the length of our room slowly. As if the lion were dragging its nails slowly across the walls. Then the sound started to rise. It started near ground level and slowly went higher. To the windows. To the loft. To the roof. After one final thud, it soon became clear that the lion was standing on top of the house. Then it jumped. The entire ceiling sagged generously. Bits and pieces of snow slipped in through unseen cracks. I beckoned for the kids to follow me towards the door before the beast jumped again. When it did, the wood started to crack. An entire panel fell onto the floor in front of us. A small pillar of snow started to leak openly into the kitchen sink. The lion jumped again, and again, as more planks from the ceiling fell haplessly to the floor. I opened our door gently, so as not to disturb the creature, before one final jump caused the entire ceiling to give way. The four of us squeaked out of the collapsed cabin as the lion writhed and growled at the thousands of splinters assuredly sinking into its fur. We passed the remains of RJ. He did not leave much more behind than a shell of bones and rib cages. He looked like a spent lobster. John's horrified scream drew back the attention of the creature. I could hear it stirring in the rubble. I pulled my gun off my shoulder as the kids ran him to the car and fired a shot in the general direction of the cabin. The animal screamed. It sounded so human that it made me pause and reconsider. Then I raced towards the car, opened the door, and threw my key in the ignition. We never looked back. The car stalled out in a snowbank 3/4 of the way back to my ranger cabin. I made the group get out and run. Part of me felt like it was watching us, waiting for another opportunity to strike. When we made it back, I sounded every single goddamn alarm I had. The incident was thoroughly investigated by the National Park Service. My coworker's death was determined to be a bear attack. The roof collapse caused by natural occurrences. I told them that was impossible. I told them no bear could cause injuries or damage like that. No bear could launch itself on top of a house. But we never had any evidence. And so our story was, for the most part, ignored. Regardless, I know what I saw. The American lion is still alive and well. It could be hunting people as we speak. It could be stalking the same south suburban woods we wander with so much blind trust. Sometimes, I can still hear it scream at night. I know it's not alone. Posted by you/first, Breath 1. Something is seriously wrong with my Honda CR-V. The proudest moment of my life came on the day I bought my first car. I know that sounds uninspiring. Most people claim the day they got married. Some folks say the day their child was born. Some people are more career focused, right, and they might say, the day I graduated university, of course, peasant. Or some shit. But nah. Not me. The proudest moment of my life came when I walked into the dealership with a pair of dirt-stained jeans and an envelope worth $10,000 sticking out of the pocket. I was 25 at the time. I had worked 6 years for that envelope. 6 years on the bus. 6 years on construction sites. 6 years of eating shit, taking orders, and earning next to nothing pay. And that day stood out as the first time in a long time where I could finally fucking treat myself. So I marched myself up to the nearest sharp-dressed salesman. I stuck out my hand. And with a shit-eating voice soaked in false confidence and irritating bravado, I asked him to take me to your highest-priced SUV, please. The man rolled his eyes so hard that I thought they might pop back up at the bottom. Right this way, sir. I took heed of his annoyed attitude and quietly toned down the excitement. After one quick look up and down, the man did not seem very intrigued by the prospect of a big sale. I wondered why and found out 2 short minutes later. Turns out the most expensive car in any dealership is worth a lot more than $10,000. You can put the money down, but your monthly payment might still be around $500, the salesman mused. I might be able to get you down to $400 a month, if you forego some of the fancier features. 10 minutes prior, I expected to walk out the dealership with a brand new car fully paid off. Blame my youth for that overwhelmingly stupid mistake. But the unfortunate reality was that I could hand that man my $10,000 and still be indebted to him for years to come. This revelation allowed one of the more embarrassing moments of my life to play out all over my face. Look, kid, we might have more cars in your price range. But they're used. My problem did in fact remain. I was carless and could no longer commute to my job across the state. The early hours killed me. It had placed a strain on my relationship, made me late on multiple occasions, and altogether sucked something horrible. I swallowed the awesome pride I felt only a moment prior and followed the man sadly with a metaphorical tail tucked between my legs. I told him, let's keep it under 10,000. Because I still wanted to feel like I had accomplished something that day. And the rest is history. I got suckered into purchasing a white 2009 Honda CR-V for $8,000 and change. I put the rest towards a warranty and the taxes on my purchase. I walked out of the building with the keys in hand an hour later. An owner. Finally, an owner of something. Fuck, that felt good. I drove the car home to my shitty apartment in an even shittier part of the city. Luckily for me, there was an open parking spot only 20 feet from my bedroom window. I parked in it, put on the emergency brake, and locked the doors about 30 times. Then I walked up the steps to my apartment, got changed, and went to bed. It had to be close to 10 o'clock at night by that point. I made the mistake of making a big purchase on a weekday. Work waited for me in approximately 8 hours, and I knew I would be a zombie the next day if I stayed up much later. But sleep became hard to come by. I stayed awake until 11, then 12, then 1 and 2, just reading stories on the internet and watching TV lazily. I checked my car in the street anxiously every few minutes. Something about the anxiety of my prized possession sitting outside in the wide awful world made me even more on edge. I couldn't let it go. I checked the window for the last time at 1:30. That is when I finally saw something to give me some actual concern. The streetlight in my lot has a unique way of illuminating the cars. Sometimes you could see their entire contents. Some you could only see shadows. So, naturally, at first, I only saw a shadow sitting in the driver's seat of my CR-V. My completely empty Honda CR-V. I didn't think it could be anything supernatural. Not at first. I never really believed in ghosts, per se. And so my first reaction was to run outside and stop the asshole who might be trying to steal my car. I threw on basketball shorts and a sweatshirt in a panic and darted out of the building. By the time I made it back to the front porch, the time on my cell read 2:15 in the morning. I peeled out of the staircase in a panic and darted over to my CR-V. I could still see a shadow in the seat. Get the fuck out of my car, I screamed confidently. The police are already on their way. They weren't. But I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 in a panic as I stood there stupidly in the parking lot. I hoped the man inside would realize his situation and run. But it didn't. The shadow in my driver's seat turned to look at me slowly. It was still too dark, and I still could not see features, but I could tell it had to be a man. I could also tell that whomever was in that seat had to be looking right at me through the window. And then somebody started screaming. The shock of the scream sent me hurtling backwards towards the pavement. I looked around and wondered if anyone else heard it. But the parking lot was empty. And so I backed up about 10 more feet. Something started to thrash around in my car. I know that's a weird way to describe it. But I could still not see anything but a blur of motion dancing between the front and back seats. The scream started to get louder, more high-pitched, and more angry. I ran away from the car and waited for the police, like a coward, by the staircase. The sound stopped as soon as they arrived. I gave the officers the key to my car. I followed them apprehensively as they walked up to the Honda and unlocked it with guns drawn. But it was empty. Not a soul or shadow inside. The only thing that could provide evidence of my encounter was the horrible damage to the interior. Bites and scratch marks covered the seating. Pieces of cloth and upholstery floated around the air haphazardly like dust. After clearing the car, one of the officers asked, "Did you have an animal in there?" And I told him no. They took a report. In the end, they told me that there was not much else to do. They could share the report with the dealership, and I could try to get some money back, but it was far from a guarantee. Most of these sales are final. And we had nothing to prove that an animal could not have gotten inside. Nevertheless, that morning I marched myself right back down to the dealership and shoved the police report in that same salesman's face. He offered a dubious look as he looked through the details. He paused for about 10 minutes before actually answering my questions. Finally, he said, in a voice that sounded just as disappointed as shocked, "I'll let you pick out another car. Truth be told, CRVs are popular, and that one will sell again in no time. I felt relief wash over me like a warm gun. You know, that car does have some history to it. The last owner died in a wreck. We had to rebuild it from scratch. Now he tells me. I went through the entire process of signing over paperwork and signing new papers instead. I must have stayed there an additional 2 to 3 hours. But, in the end, I left the CRV at the dealership. I walked away with a nice, safe Honda Accord and tried to put the weird experience behind me. I went home that night and parked just like I did before. I checked my car incessantly throughout the night, just like I did before. I was still on edge. But nothing happened. I woke up the next morning to the same little Accord sitting in the same spot. I drove to work that morning fully prepared to put the weirdness behind me. New responsibilities and new issues quickly took over my mind's eye. I was focused on the road, but at the same time, I could have been a bit distracted. I only saw the CRV cut into my lane at the last moment. Maybe that's why I was unable to avoid the accident. I over-adjusted. My tires cut out and I skidded into the guardrail at 60 miles an hour. The first thing I felt was rain dripping in through the cracks in my Accord. The first thing I heard were police sirens and the concerned tones of passerbys. I looked around frantically for my partner in the accident, but blood quickly covered my face and got into my eyes. I only got one more look at the offending individual before he disappeared into the nearest exit. The man who hit me was driving a white Honda CRV.